Hey everyone, Bobo's here, coming out with another build guide, and this time it's for a dual totem Shockwave build on a Chieftain character, and this is the most recent iteration of Shockwave Totem that I have fully built. I built this character, I think last league it was. I haven't built another version of it this league, but I was messing around with it then. It's probably going to be the second out of 3 Shockwave characters that I display on the channel. The next one is going to be a Hierophant Shockwave, and I've done that before, but I kind of want to, I got a new idea, so I want to have a little bit of a different take on it and try that, and then I'll be posting that to the channel. But yeah, I decided not to do the Inquisitor version or make a guide for the Inquisitor version because there's already so many guides for that version out there that I figured it would sort of just be redundant. So I'll cover this one and then I'll do the other one in a later video. Now getting into this build, I guess we can go over the links first. So it's Shockwave Totem. This is a level 21 increased area effect, which you just swap out for conk effect for bosses that are fairly immobile. Increased critical strikes. Now this is important in this build because it's not an assassin, so we don't get tons of free crit from the power charges or tons of base crit. Faster casting, added fire, and control destruction. Now you can also use critical strike damage in place of control destruction, but I find that in my current crit multi-levels, control destruction is more damage, and you could swap it out for added fire if you change the colors a bit, but there's a reason why we have added fire in there, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So as for the damage, you can see it's around 36k, which is fairly respectable. When you have your charges up, this will go to around, I believe, 61k or so. And if you pop Taste of Hate, you can get a little bit more than that. When you throw Concentrated Effect in there, you can get close to 100k damage with Taste of Hate. So if you remember from the previous build, I think it was like 115k with Taste of Hate procced and stuff like that. So a little bit less damage, at least tooltip wise, but there are some hidden damage with this build because of the Ascendancy, and I'll get into that in a bit, but I'll go over the gear first. So again, as you can see, we're using dual wands with this build. Nothing too special here. These are pretty decent wands, but nothing super unattainable. I don't even think I have crit on this one. Yeah, this one doesn't have crit or crit multi, but it has some pretty high rolls in the other areas. So, just boots with life and res and mana. Mana is going to be sort of an issue on this build. It's not a super bad issue because, again, with the map changes that I was speaking about in the previous guide and the assassin guide, you're not going to have that minus mana regen anymore. So you can kind of just get a fixed value of mana regen to sustain your casts, and you'll be good. And if you notice, the damage or the mana cost of this is like about 30 or so less than the other build, and that's because we pick up some reduced mana cost nodes from the tree and stuff like that. So it's not quite as bad on mana, and but picking up mana where you can is always a nice boon. I actually don't have any mana on this helm, and this helm is also not enchanted for a Shockwave Totem, but most of the enchants are pretty good. As I was saying before, you can get the cast speed one, which is great for damage, or if you want more area, the area effect one works great. And then basically just mana, mana regen, and some cast speed, crit multi, mana, and mana regen again on the neck. And just make sure you get a good rustic sash, and you should be set. Now the gloves, currently this character has a version of Facebreakers that has the 90% crit multi, and then like I said, because this character is sort of, I think I built it a league back or something. I forget exactly when Facebreakers were nerfed. I think it was coming into this current league. So Facebreakers have half this amount of crit multi now, and I would say it's probably not worth using them. You can pretty much just get a pair of rare gloves with life and resistances. And that'll help make it easier to get some nice rings with the mana regen and mana on them, because you won't have to worry so much about getting the res on those as well. So that's pretty much the gear, and then let's get into the actual Ascendancy, which is kind of where this build differs from the other builds. So the main node we're building this build around is the Death's Fury node, and it's to give us essentially the 1% of damage dealt by your totems as each use life. Now, this was kind of an experiment. I wanted to see how this felt. I played it with Vol Pact. I did a variation with Vol Pact and a variation. This is the non-Vol Pact variation with just life regen and normal leech. Oh no, sorry, this is the Vol Pact variation. Yeah. So you can do it with or without Vol Pact. But in my experience, if you're trying to do this without Vol Pact, the leech just feels very inconsistent to me, which is why I ended up taking Vol Pact, because you're hitting very hard and it kind of comes in chunks. So what'll happen is you'll be getting sort of chunked out a little bit, and then your life will just spike back up because you're doing so much damage per totem. If you don't have Vol Pact, you're going to have just tons of issues because you're going to hit that leech cap and you're going to, the leech rate isn't going to be there. So it's just not going to feel very good. And you don't have a ton of life regen on this build. It's not as heavy in life regen as the other Incinerate Totem build. So going Vol Pact isn't as much of a loss because you're not losing all of that life regen. So that's why I ended up inevitably going Vol Pact on this. And it feels pretty good. Ultimately, I don't really care for the way the totems leech, and this is probably not my preferred version of the build, but it's certainly not a bad build by any standard, I would say. And the leech can definitely help in certain circumstances. It's just not the best on Shockwave Totem because of how they deal damage, and like something I feel like it's much better on the Incinerate Totem character, for example. And yeah, so that's a little bit about that node. But the other part of this node is 20% of physical damage is extra fire damage if you or your totems have killed recently. Now, part of what I was trying to do here as well is stack fire damage because of this node down here, which gives us essentially 16% more physical and fire damage when you have a totem, or enemies near your totems take that much more damage. Now, Shockwave Totem does physical, and we do a lot of fire because we get 20% if we've killed recently. And then we have Herald of Ash, which is another 15% of our physical damage. And then we have Added Fire, which is 44% of our physical damage gained as fire. So we're basically looking at around 80% of our damage added as fire when we're in like a mapping, running through a map setting or something like that. So it's pretty substantial fire damage for our 16% more here. And then our physical damage is getting buffed by this, and we're also penetrating 10% of the mob's fire resist. Now that's not huge, but it's not nothing either. So yeah, it's not too bad, and this gives us a little bit of extra damage against burning enemies, but the build is primarily centered around this node and this node. Now in this particular character, I didn't bother to do Uber, but I think the best thing you could do would be to come and get this node right here, which makes your totems immune to fire damage, and more importantly, gives them the 20% chance to taunt on hit. Now, the taunt is amazing, because I have played it with the taunt on the Incinerate character, and it's pretty much just godly. But the fire immunity is actually pretty useful for this build too, because although it doesn't do pure fire damage, what you can do is if you are running an Ellie Reflect map, you can just remove Hatred. And you're pretty much, your totems aren't going to do any damage to themselves because all the rest of the added damage is fire, unless you have, I guess, non-fire damage on your wands or something like that. So my totems would do a little bit of damage due to this lightning damage right here, but it's nothing that's like super significant and is going to like absolutely wreck your totems or anything like that. And in addition, by doing so much fire damage, I forgot to mention your totems are leeching life to themselves through the fire damage they do. So not for the full value of the damage, but for the fire damage, which is fairly substantial. So they're somewhat tankier than they otherwise would be. So yeah, that's pretty much the goal of going that Ascendancy. If we look at the build path, pretty standard Shockwave build, basically just trying to get life here, get the area nodes, pick up some power charges, pick up a little bit of mana and reduce mana cost of skills because it's right there. This jewel should be taken. I don't know why it's not, but just picking up some crit and crit multi where we can, the easy stuff. And it's not a build that's meant to heavily rely on crit, but you want to pick up at least a little bit of crit so you have some crit going there. And let's get into the auras and stuff, I guess. So we already mentioned Herald of Ash. I like running Hatred on pretty much all Shockwave Totem builds because especially when you're critting, you do freeze most things, and it just makes the build feel a lot safer in general. Um, and there's not really many other good auras to run. You could run some Blasphemy stuff as well if you wanted, I suppose. But I really like Hatred. I run Clarity on here just to give a bit of extra mana regen. I think we're at 140 per second, and the totems cost around 147. So it's pretty decent mana. As you can see, you don't really have mana problems, and I'll put a link to myself running a map with this so you can get a better idea of how it plays. But yeah, don't really run into many mana problems at all. And you get Lightning Golem as well for the extra damage. And then I also run Rallying Cry on this. It gives a little bit of extra damage as well as helps with the mana. So if you're having any mana trouble at all, I think Rallying Cry is your answer. It's very easy to keep up, especially throwing like an increased duration in there or something, and just really helps out your mana a ton. To generate the power charges, we go Orb of Storms. Fairly simple. And I think that's pretty much it. We have a cast on damage taken set up in our face breakers, and then we have an Enlighten to power some of these just to free up a bit of extra mana. Not super necessary though. And I think we use a Flame Dash to get around, and that's pretty much it. Yeah. So yeah, overall, it's definitely a solid build. I probably couldn't recommend it over the Assassin version, but I would say it is definitely a bit tankier in some situations. So if you prefer that aspect of it, then I'd say go for it. And yeah, I'll just leave the playthrough at the end of this video, and you guys can see what you think about it. So thank you very much for watching, and if you have any questions or concerns, just leave them in the comments, and I'll do my best to get back to you. Thanks again.